Have you ever wondered why the world so often turns its back on those who don't shimmer with the polish of privilege? Why a glance at worn shoes or a modest frame sparks dismissal, as if the soul beneath carries no weight? There's a quiet cruelty in this, a shadow cast by arrogance that blinds the proud to the strength of the unassuming. In the heart of Boston, where wealth and status carve lines as sharp as a blade, the elite shooters club stood as a monument to this divide, a place where power was measured in gold, in custom rifles, and in the swagger of those who believed they owned the world. Picture it now. You're standing in a hall that smells of polished wood and gun oil, where the air hums with the clink of crystal glasses and the low murmur of self-assured voices. The Elite Shooters Club was no mere range. It was a temple for those who could afford its membership, a fortress for the elite. Here, Blake Radcliffe reigned supreme, a man whose name was etched in gold. National champion, Olympic medalist, heir to an oil fortune, Blake carried himself like a king, his custom Remington a scepter, his every shot a decree. His smirk was a weapon, sharp and cutting. As he surveyed his kingdom, the crowd's applause, a chorus to his glory. Another bullseye, another victory, another brick in the wall that separated him from the ordinary. But beyond the spotlight, where the polished boots and tailored suits held court, stood a woman who seemed to belong to another world. Emma Miller, Censor Wu, clutched a worn leather purse, her cardigan and department store jeans a stark contrast to the gleaming opulence around her. You see her, don't you? Standing there, a dandelion among roses. Her presence an affront to the meticulous order of this place. Her hazel eyes held a quiet resolve. But to the receptionist, to Blake, to the crowd, she was invisible, a nobody who had wandered into a world that wasn't hers. "Excuse me." Emma's voice was soft, steady, cutting through the hum of disdain. "I'd like to register for today's open practice." The receptionist barely glanced up, her eyes skimming Emma's modest attire with a flicker of dismissal. "Membership cards only," she said, her tone as cold as the marble counter. Emma didn't falter. From her purse, she produced a crumpled envelope. A day pass, a gift from someone who believed in her. "It was a gift," she said simply, her words carrying a weight the receptionist couldn't fathom. Blake noticed her then, his blue eyes narrowing as he spotted the anomaly in his perfect world. "You can feel it, can't you?" That moment when the predator senses something out of place, something that doesn't belong. His smirk widened, a hunter's grin, as he sauntered toward her, his voice loud enough to draw the room's attention. "Looks like someone took a wrong turn on the way to Walmart," he drawled, and his friend's laughter echoed like a pack of hyenas, sharp and cruel. Emma kept her eyes on the floor, her steps measured as she moved to the basic range, her heart steady despite the weight of their scorn. Blake wasn't done. $10 says she can't hit the target. One of his friends jeered. "Make it 10,000, Blake countered, his voice dripping with certainty. "She's never held a gun in her life." The crowd leaned in, eager for the spectacle, hungry for the moment when this unassuming woman would falter and prove their world untouchable. Emma set her purse down, her hands steady as she unwrapped an old Glock Sherjo. Serviceable, unremarkable, a relic compared to the gleaming rifles around her. The room held its breath, waiting for her failure. Blake leaned closer, his voice a mockery of politeness. "Are you sure you're in the right place, ma'am? This isn't a knitting circle." Emma's hazel eyes met his, and for a moment, something flickered in Blake's confidence. A shadow of doubt, quickly buried. "I'm just here to practice," she said, her voice a calm river, unshaken by the storm of his arrogance. "Practice?" Blake scoffed, louder now, his words a performance for the crowd. This is a place for serious shooters. 10,000 says, you can't hit the bullseye from 50 yards. Emma's expression didn't change, but her fingers brushed the gold band on her left hand. A gesture so small, yet so heavy with meaning. I don't have that kind of money, she said, her voice quiet but resolute. Blake's grin turned predatory. If you make the shot, I'll pay. If you miss, you leave. Never come back. Deal? The room fell silent, the tension thick as fog. You're there, aren't you? Feeling the weight of every eye on Emma, the air heavy with anticipation. She nodded, her agreement a quiet defiance. Blake motioned to the crowd, his voice booming. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a show. Emma stepped to the line, her movements precise, practiced, as if her body had been shaped by something far greater than this moment. No one noticed the shift in her posture, the way her shoulders relaxed, her grip firm yet fluid. No one saw the ghost of a promise in her eyes, the weight of a love lost but never forgotten. Emma raised the Glock, her breath steady, her focus narrowing to the target. The world fell away. Blake's taunts, the crowd's whispers, the weight of their judgment. There was only the gun, the target, and the memory of a man who had taught her to trust herself. She squeezed the trigger, and the shot rang out, sharp and clear. The target slid forward, and when it stopped, the room gasped, a perfect bullseye. Blake's smirk faltered, his certainty cracking like thin ice. Emma didn't react. She didn't need to. Her shot had spoken for her, a quiet declaration that she belonged. You feel it, don't you? That shift in the air, the moment when the invisible becomes undeniable. Emma Miller was no ordinary woman. She was a force, shaped by loss, by love, by a promise that burned brighter than any spotlight. The silence in the elite shooters club hung like a held breath, the echo of Emma's shot still ringing in the air. The crowd, once so certain of her failure, stirred with unease, their whispers a soft ripple against the weight of what they just witnessed. Blake Radcliffe stood frozen, his blue eyes fixed on the target, searching for some flaw, some trick to explain the impossible. A perfect bullseye from a woman who, moments ago, had been nothing more than a punchline. You feel it, don't you? That crack in the foundation of his world, the moment when certainty begins to crumble under the weight of truth. Emma lowered her Glock, her movements as steady as the shot she'd just fired. There was no triumph in her expression, no flicker of pride. Her hazel eyes remained calm, as if the bullseye was merely a step in a journey only she understood. The gold band on her finger glinted faintly under the fluorescent lights, a silent testament to the man who had shaped her. Nathan Miller, a Navy SEAL whose lessons lived in her hands, her breath, her unwavering focus. She wasn't here for Blake or the crowd. She was here for a promise, one forged in love and tempered by loss. Blake's voice broke the silence, sharp and strained. Beginner's luck, he muttered, though the words lacked the venom he'd intended. His friends nodded, eager to cling to the narrative they knew. But the crowd's murmurs told a different story. Doubt had crept in, a shadow that Blake couldn't shake. He stepped closer, his smirk forced now, a mask to hide the unease gnawing at him. Let's see you do it again, he said, his tone a challenge wrapped in bravado. 3 bullseyes, 75 yards. $50,000 says you can't. You're standing there, aren't you? In the thick of the crowd, feeling the tension coil tighter, the air heavy with anticipation. Emma didn't flinch. She met Blake's gaze, her expression unreadable, her voice soft but unyielding. I'll take the challenge, she said, and the room seemed to lean forward, caught in the gravity of her quiet defiance. Rebecca Johnson, the club's manager, stepped forward, her professional demeanor tinged with something new, curiosity, perhaps, or the faintest hint of respect. Miss Miller, she said, her voice low, Blake holds the club record at that distance. No one's beaten him in years. Emma nodded, her response simple. Thank you for the warning, Miss Johnson. I'll be fine. There was no arrogance in her words, only a certainty that seemed to come from somewhere deeper, somewhere untouchable. Blake's grin returned, but it was brittle, a facade to mask the flicker of fear in his chest. He motioned to the range, his voice loud for the crowd. "Let's make this interesting." The Macmillan TAC Sembite Censurebot was brought out, a rifle that gleamed with precision and power, a weapon Blake had mastered over years of competition. It was his domain, his sanctuary, and he was certain it would be Emma's undoing. You can see it in his eyes, can't you? That desperate need to reclaim control, to prove that this woman, this nobody, could not threaten his throne. Emma took the rifle, its weight unfamiliar but not daunting. Her hands moved with a quiet grace, adjusting the stock, aligning the scope, as if she'd done it 1,000 times before. The crowd watched, their skepticism warring with the growing sense that something extraordinary was unfolding. Blake stood to the side, arms crossed, his confidence a thin veneer over the doubt that gnawed at him. He had underestimated her. He wouldn't admit it, but the memory of her first shot lingered like a splinter in his mind. Emma stepped to the 75-yard line, her posture steady, her breath even. The world narrowed to the target, the rifle, and the lessons Nathan had etched into her soul. You're there with her, aren't you? Feeling the weight of the moment, the way her heart beat steady despite the eyes boring into her, the whispers that tried to pull her down. She didn't hear them. She didn't need to. Nathan's voice was there instead, soft but clear. "Control your breath, Emma. Let the world fall away." The first shot cracked through the air, sharp and clean. The target slid forward, and the crowd gasped as the bullseye appeared, perfect and undeniable. Blake's jaw tightened, his fingers twitching at his sides. "Luck," he muttered, but the words sounded hollow, even to him. Emma didn't pause. She adjusted her stance, recalibrated her focus, and fired again. Another bullseye. The murmurs grew louder now, a wave of disbelief rippling through the room. Blake's smile was gone, replaced by a scowl as he watched the woman who was dismantling his world, shot by shot. The third shot came, and with it a silence so profound it seemed to swallow the room. The target moved forward, and there it was, another perfect bullseye. 3 for 3. The crowd erupted, a mix of awe and disbelief, their applause a thunder that Blake could not ignore. You feel it, don't you? The shift in the air, the moment when the underdog becomes something more, something unstoppable. Rebecca stepped forward, her eyes wide with admiration. "That was exceptional, Miss Miller," she said, her voice carrying a weight that silenced the room. Emma nodded, her expression unchanged, as if the victory was secondary to something far more important. "Thank you," she said softly, placing the rifle down with the same care she'd given every movement. Blake's face was a storm of emotions, anger, disbelief, fear. He turned to the crowd, his voice rising. "This isn't over," he declared, his words sharp with desperation. "1 week from today, a formal competition. 10 stations, varying distances, club equipment. No tricks, no flukes." His eyes locked on Emma, challenging her to back down, to prove she was nothing more than a fleeting anomaly. Emma met his gaze, her hazel eyes steady, unflinching. "I accept," she said, her voice a quiet blade that cut through his bravado. The crowd buzzed, the anticipation electric, but Emma felt none of it. She gathered her things, her movements deliberate, as if the weight of the challenge was no heavier than the purse she carried. "You see her, don't you? The woman who stands alone, not because she seeks to, but because she knows her own strength, a strength born of loss and love, and a promise that burns brighter than any spotlight." As she walked out of the range, the whispers followed her. But they were different now, no longer mocking. They carried a note of wonder, of respect. Blake stood in her wake, his kingdom shaken, his certainty unraveling. He had underestimated her, and now the world was watching. The week ahead would be a reckoning, not just for him, but for the walls he'd built, the assumptions he'd clung to, the arrogance that had blinded him to the power of the quiet ones. Emma didn't look back. She didn't need to. The promise she carried was her anchor, her guide, her truth. And it was enough. The week that followed was a restless tide, pulling at the edges of Boston's polished streets and the quiet corners of Emma Miller's life. The elite shooters club, once a fortress of certainty, now hummed with whispers of the woman who had dared to challenge its king. Emma's perfect shots had become a story, a spark that flickered in the minds of those who had seen her, spreading like wildfire through the city's elite circles and beyond. You feel it, don't you? That undercurrent of change, the way a single moment can ripple outward, shaking the foundations of what was once thought unshakable. Emma moved through her days with the same quiet resolve, her small apartment a sanctuary from the growing noise. Her job at the accounting firm, with its endless spreadsheets and muted conversations, felt like a distant echo of a life she no longer fully inhabited. At night, she opened the wooden box on her kitchen table, Nathan's medals and letters, a silent chorus of memory. His logbook, filled with notes in his precise handwriting, was her anchor. Emma, Chishtrue yards, steady hands, sharper than most. The words carried her back to their backyard, to the summer evenings when Nathan's voice had been her guide, his hands steadying hers as they moved through the rhythm of the shot. "It's not about the target, Emma," he'd said. "It's about who you are when you pull the trigger." Outside, the world was louder. Blake Radcliffe, shaken by his loss, was not a man to sit quietly in defeat. His penthouse was a hive of activity, his team scrambling to reshape the narrative. They pored over footage of Emma's shots, searching for some flaw, some explanation for the impossible. Blake's investigators had dug into her past, but what they found was frustratingly sparse. A woman with no competitive record, no social media presence, no trace of the skill she'd displayed. She was a ghost, and that made her dangerous. You see it in Blake's eyes, don't you? The way his confidence frays, the way his need for control twists into something darker, more desperate. Blake couldn't sleep. The weight of his reputation, his family's legacy, pressed against him like a storm cloud. He poured another whiskey, staring out at the city skyline, his mind replaying Emma's shots, each one a crack in the armor he'd spent years forging. He had built his identity on being untouchable, the champion who could not be challenged. But Emma, with her worn purse and unassuming presence, had exposed something he couldn't face, the fragility of his own myth. He needed to win, not just to reclaim his title, but to prove that the world still bent to his will. Emma, meanwhile, felt no such pressure. She spent her evenings at a local range, practicing with the same Glock. Sure Joe its weight. Familiar, its simplicity a comfort. The Macmillan TAC semi-censure bod, the rifle Blake favored, was new to her, but she approached it with the same calm focus Nathan had taught her. Adapt and overcome, he'd said, his voice a steady pulse in her memory. She didn't need to master the rifle to win. She needed to master herself, and that, she knew, was already done. The night before the competition, Rebecca Johnson called. Her voice was steady, but there was an edge of concern. "Miss Miller, there's been a change." Blake's requested a modified scoring system, each station weighted by difficulty, with the final station at 30% of the total score. It was a subtle shift, designed to favor Blake's expertise at longer ranges, a move to tip the scales. Emma listened, her response as calm as ever. "Thank you, Miss Johnson. No changes needed on my end." You hear it, don't you? The quiet strength in her voice, the unshakable certainty that comes from knowing your own worth. Blake's team, in contrast, was a flurry of calculation. They adjusted his training, fine-tuned his equipment, ensured every detail was in his favor. He had influence, Connections, the kind of power that could bend rules without breaking them. But beneath the strategy, there was fear. Emma was no longer just a woman with a day pass. She was a threat, a variable he couldn't control. He needed her to fail, not just for the crowd, but for himself, to prove that the world still belonged to men like him. The morning of the competition dawned cold and clear. The elite shooters club transformed into an arena. Spectators filled the stands, their anticipation a living thing, buzzing through the air. Blake entered first, his steps deliberate, his smile a practiced mask for the cameras. He waved to the crowd, his confidence a performance, but his eyes betrayed him, darting, restless, searching for Emma. You feel the weight of his gaze, don't you? The way it carries both arrogance and unease. A man teetering on the edge of his own myth. Emma arrived quietly, her navy button-down and jeans a stark contrast to the tailored suits around her. She carried a small duffel bag, Nathan's logbook tucked inside, a silent reminder of why she was here. The crowd fell silent as she took her place, their curiosity a heavy presence. She was no longer the invisible woman. She was the one who had shaken Blake's throne, the one who might do it again. You're there with her, aren't you? Standing in the quiet space where the world's noise fades, where only the target and the promise remain. The competition began with the sharp crack of gunfire, the rhythm of shots filling the air. Blake was flawless at the early stations, his movements polished, his shots precise. He thrived on the crowd's approval, each bullseye a reminder of who he was supposed to be. But Emma matched him shot for shot, her approach quieter, less showy, but no less effective. Her focus was a blade, cutting through the distractions, her hands steady as they moved from pistol to rifle, from close range to long. By the fifth station, the scores were nearly tied, and the crowd's murmurs grew louder, their skepticism. Blake felt it, the shift in the room, the way the crowd's eyes lingered on Emma. His lead was slipping, and with it, his grip on the narrative. At the sixth station, the equipment was subtly altered, a heavier trigger pull, a scope slightly misaligned. It was no accident, but Emma didn't hesitate. She adjusted, recalibrated, and fired. Another bullseye. Ah! The crowd gasped, and Blake's scowl deepened. You see it, don't you? The way his world is unraveling, thread by thread, as Emma's quiet strength rewrites the story. By the eighth station, the gap had closed. Emma's consistency was a force, her shots landing with a precision that spoke of something deeper than skill. Blake's flair, his dramatic flourishes, began to feel hollow, a performance that couldn't match the truth of her focus. The crowd was no longer his. They were watching her, waiting for the moment when the impossible became undeniable. And as they approached the final station, the Macmillan tack sembide censure bod, waiting like a judge, the air grew thick with anticipation. This was it, the moment that would define them both. Emma felt Nathan's presence, his voice guiding her as she lifted the rifle. Control, Emma, always control. She was ready. The elite shooters club was no longer just a range. It had become a crucible, a place where the weight of every shot carried the hopes and doubts of those who watched. The air was thick with the scent of gunpowder and anticipation, the crowd's eyes fixed on the final station where the Macmillan T-Tac Sembi-Sangerbot weighted its sleek lines. A silent challenge. Blake Radcliffe stood to the side, his arms crossed, his face a mask of forced confidence. But beneath it you could see it, couldn't you? The tremor of uncertainty, the way his fingers twitched, betraying the storm brewing within. He had built his life on being untouchable, but Emma Miller, with her quiet presence and unyielding focus, was dismantling that illusion. Shot by shot, Emma stepped to the line, the rifle heavy in her hands, but not unfamiliar. She had spent the week preparing, not with the frantic energy of Blake's team, but with the steady rhythm of someone who knew their own heart. Nathan's voice was with her, as it always was, a soft murmur in the back of her mind. "It's not about the weapon, Emma. It's about you." Her fingers adjusted the stock, her eyes narrowed through the scope, and the world fell away. The crowd, Blake, the weight of their expectations, they were nothing compared to the promise she carried, the promise that had brought her here. "You're there, aren't you?" Standing in the hush of that moment, feeling the pulse of her resolve. Final station was no ordinary challenge. 75 yards, a distance that tested even the best, with a scoring system weighted to favor Blake's expertise. He had fired first, his shots landing with the precision of a man who had mastered this rifle over years. 9 out of 10 bullseyes, a score that would have secured his victory against anyone else. The crowd had cheered, their faith in him restored, but their eyes kept drifting to Emma, waiting for the moment she would falter. She didn't. Her first shot cracked through the air, sharp and clean, the bullet finding the center of the target with a precision that silenced the room. The crowd leaned forward, their breath held as the target slid forward. A perfect bullseye. Blake's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing as he watched, his confidence fraying like a worn rope. Emma didn't pause. She adjusted her stance, her movements fluid, as if the rifle were an extension of her body. The second shot followed, another bullseye, and the murmurs in the crowd grew louder, a mix of awe and disbelief. "You feel it, don't you? The way the room shifts, the way the narrative bends toward the woman who was never supposed to belong." Blake's face was a study in contradictions, anger, fear, and a desperate need to hold on to what he'd always known. He stepped closer, his voice low but sharp. "One more," he said, as if the words could will her to fail. "You can't do it again." But Emma didn't hear him. She was elsewhere, in a backyard under a summer sky, Nathan's hands guiding hers, his voice steady. "Breathe, Emma. Let everything else fall away." She exhaled, her fingers steady on the trigger, and fired the third shot. The silence that followed was profound, a moment where time itself seemed to pause. The target moved forward, and when it stopped, the truth was undeniable. Another perfect bullseye. 10 out of 10. The crowd erupted, their applause a tidal wave that crashed over Blake's fading kingdom. Emma lowered the rifle, her expression unchanged, her heart steady. She didn't need their cheers. She didn't need their validation. She had kept her promise, and that was enough. Rebecca Johnson stepped forward, her professional mask slipping to reveal genuine admiration. "Miss Miller," she said, her voice carrying over the noise, "you've done what no one else could. You've earned your place here." The words were simple, but they carried a weight that Blake couldn't ignore. His face drained of color, his hands clenching into fists as he struggled to process the impossible. He had been so certain, so sure that his world was unassailable. But Emma, with her quiet strength, had exposed its fragility. Blake's voice broke through the applause, sharp with desperation. "This is a fluke," he hissed, turning to the crowd. "She's no one. She can't be this good." But the evidence was clear, witnessed by dozens, including Senator Williams, whose presence lent an undeniable authority to the moment. Rebecca's gaze was cool as she responded. "Mr. Radcliffe, the shots were legitimate. The footage is clear." She held up her tablet, displaying security footage that showed Blake's team tampering with the equipment, subtle adjustments meant to throw Emma off. The crowd gasped, their whispers turning to murmurs of outrage. "You see it, don't you? The moment when the champion's mask cracks, when the truth lays bare the flaws he'd hidden so well." Blake's face flushed, his voice rising. "This is ridiculous. You think I'd let some nobody?" But the crowd wasn't listening. Their eyes were on Emma, the woman who had walked into their world with nothing but a day pass and a promise, and left as something more, a symbol of resilience, of quiet power that needed no fanfare. Emma gathered her things, her movements deliberate, as if the weight of the victory was no heavier than the duffel bag she carried. "I believe we had an agreement, Mr. Radcliffe," she said, her voice low but firm. 50,000 to the Veterans Support Foundation. Blake's jaw clenched, his pride warring with the reality he couldn't escape. The crowd watched, waiting for his response, but he had none. His kingdom was crumbling, and he could feel it slipping through his fingers. As Emma walked off the range, the crowd parted, their silence a mix of respect and wonder. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. The promise she'd made to Nathan, the promise that had carried her through grief and doubt, was fulfilled. You feel it, don't you? That quiet triumph, not of victory over another, but of victory over the self. The moment when the heart knows it has done what it set out to do. Blake, left in her wake, was a man unmoored. His team scrambled to salvage his reputation, planning statements about pressure and missteps. But the damage was done. The world had seen him falter, not just in skill, but in character. And Emma, the woman he'd dismissed as invisible, had become the story. A story that would outlast his trophies, his carefully crafted image. Emma returned to her apartment that night, the city's noise fading into the background. She opened Nathan's logbook, her fingers tracing his words, and felt a peace she hadn't known in years. She had honored him, not with fame or glory, but with the quiet strength of keeping her word. And in that moment, she knew she was enough. The days after the competition were a whirlwind, a storm of voices and lights that threatened to pull Emma Miller from the quiet center she had fought so hard to hold. The Elite Shooters Club, once a place of dismissal, now buzzed with her name, the story of her victory spreading like a river breaking its banks. Videos of her perfect shots circulated online, each frame dissected by commentators and enthusiasts, each bullseye a testament to a woman who had defied every expectation. You feel it, don't you? The way a single act can ripple outward, touching lives far beyond the moment it was born. Emma's apartment, once a refuge, was now a place of constant interruption. Her phone buzzed with messages, journalists seeking interviews, sponsors offering deals, strangers sharing stories of their own struggles, inspired by hers. The world wanted to know her, to claim a piece of the woman who had toppled Blake Radcliffe's throne. But Emma didn't want the spotlight. She didn't want the fame. She wanted only to honor Nathan, to keep the promise that had guided her through the grief that had once threatened to drown her. You see her, don't you? Sitting at her kitchen table, Nathan's logbook open before her, her fingers tracing his words as if they could bring him back, if only for a moment. Blake, meanwhile, was a man consumed by his own unraveling. His penthouse, once a symbol of his untouchable status, felt hollow now, its walls closing in as his team scrambled for damage control. The footage of his tampering had spread, a stain on his reputation that no amount of spin could erase. His statements, carefully crafted apologies about pressure and lapses in judgment, rang false, and the public's faith in him waned. You can see it in his eyes, can't you? The way his arrogance has curdled into bitterness, the way he clings to the remnants of a world that no longer bends to his will. He had underestimated Emma, and now he was paying the price, not just in loss, but in the exposure of his own fragility. Emma tried to return to her routine, to the quiet rhythm of her accounting job, but the world wouldn't let her. The Veterans Support Foundation reached out, their call a quiet intrusion into her solitude. They had seen her shots, her poise, the way she carried herself with a strength that spoke of something deeper than skill. They wanted her to lead a marksmanship training program for veterans, a way to help those struggling with reintegration find focus, control. The idea stirred something in Emma, a flicker of possibility she hadn't anticipated. You feel it, don't you? That moment when a path opens, not sought but undeniable, a chance to turn pain into something more. She met with Colonel James Harrison, the Foundation's director, in a small office that smelled of coffee and old books. His presence was steady, his eyes kind but searching, as if he saw in Emma something she hadn't yet fully claimed. "We need people like you, Miss Miller," he said, his voice rough with years of service. "People who've walked through fire and come out stronger." Nathan would be proud. The mention of her husband's name caught her off guard, a pang in her chest, but it wasn't the hollow ache of before. It was something warmer, something alive. Nathan's legacy wasn't just in her shots, it was in the way she could help others find their way back, as he had helped her. Emma hesitated. The idea of stepping into a role so public, so visible, felt like a weight she wasn't sure she could carry. She had always been the quiet one, the one who faded into the background, her grief a private burden. But as she listened to Colonel Harrison, as she thought of the veterans who might find solace in the range, she heard Nathan's voice again. "Keep practicing, Emma. Don't let fear hold you back. You're there with her, aren't you?" In that moment of decision, where the heart wrestles with the unknown, where courage is born not from certainty, but from trust in something, she agreed to take the role, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. "I'll do it," she said, and Colonel Harrison's smile was like a light breaking through clouds. "We're honored to have you," he said. "Strength doesn't always shout, Miss Miller. Sometimes it's the quiet ones who change everything." The words settled in her, a truth she was only beginning to understand. She hadn't sought this path, but it had found her, and she would walk it, not for fame or glory, but for the promise she carried, for the legacy she could share. As weeks turned to months, Emma found herself in a role she had never imagined. The shooting range became a sanctuary, not just for her, but for the veterans she worked with. They arrived with scars, some buried deep, and Emma met them with a quiet empathy that needed no words. She taught them the mechanics of the shot, the stance, the breath, but more than that, she taught them control, the kind of control that comes from knowing your own strength. You see it, don't you? The way a shared struggle builds a bridge, the way a single lesson can spark a flicker of hope. The veterans opened up, their stories spilling out like water from a cracked dam. A former Marine spoke of sleepless nights, of memories that wouldn't fade. A young Army medic shared her guilt over those she couldn't save. Emma listened, her presence a steady anchor, and in their trust she found something new, a sense of purpose that went beyond her own grief. The range became a place of healing, a place where the weight of the past could be set down, if only for a moment. And Emma, the woman who had once been invisible, became a guide, a quiet force who helped others find their way. One afternoon, as she adjusted a veteran's grip, she felt a tap on her shoulder. Michael Reeves, Nathan's old SEAL teammate, stood there, his gruff demeanor softened by a smile. "You've done good, Emma," he said, his voice thick with pride. "Nathan's watching, and he's proud." The words hit her like a wave, but they didn't break her. They filled her, a warmth that spread through the cracks in her heart. "You feel it, don't you?" That moment when the past and present align, when the promise kept becomes a legacy shared. Emma returned home that night, the city's noise a distant hum. She opened Nathan's logbook, her fingers lingering on his words, and felt a shift within her. The grief that had once defined her was still there, but it was no longer a weight. It was a part of her, woven into the strength she had found, the purpose she had claimed. She was no longer just Nathan's widow, no longer the woman dismissed at the range. She was Emma Miller, a woman who had turned loss into something beautiful, something lasting. The months that followed were a quiet unfolding, like the slow bloom of a flower after a long winter. Emma Miller's life had shifted, not in the loud, triumphant way the world expected, but in the steady, deliberate rhythm of a woman who had found her place. The Veterans Support Foundation's marksmanship program grew under her guidance, its roots sinking deep into the lives of those who came to the range. The veterans she worked with carried their wounds, some etched in flesh, others buried in the silence of their minds. But in the steady cadence of her teaching, They found something to hold. You feel it, don't you? The way a shared purpose can stitch together the frayed edges of a life. The way a single moment of trust can spark a new beginning. Emma stood at the range each day, her navy buttoned down, a familiar sight, her voice calm but firm, as she guided a former soldier through the mechanics of a shot. "Breathe," she'd say, echoing Nathan's words, her hazel eyes steady with a warmth that spoke of understanding. The veterans didn't just learn to aim, they learned to center themselves, to find control in a world that had often taken it away. Emma's presence was a quiet anchor, her own grief a bridge to theirs. And in that shared space, something grew, a community, a family bound not by blood but by the unspoken language of survival. You see them, don't you? The men and women who stand a little taller, their hands steadier, their eyes brighter because someone believed in them. The world outside the range continued to buzz with Emma's story. The videos of her shots, her calm defiance in the face of Blake Radcliffe's arrogance, had become a symbol of something larger, a reminder that strength doesn't always wear a crown. Social media carried her name, posts and comments weaving a narrative of resilience, the shmurry of the quiet ones who rise when the world least expects it. But Emma didn't read the comments, didn't watch the videos. She didn't need the world's applause. Her victory wasn't in the headlines. It was in the veterans who found their way back to themselves, in the promise she had kept to Nathan, in the peace she had found within her own heart. Blake, meanwhile, was a shadow of the man he'd been. His reputation, once a fortress, had crumbled under the weight of his own actions. The footage of his tampering, the bitterness of his defeat, lingered like a stain. He issued statements polished and contrite, but they couldn't erase the truth. He had been undone, not by Emma's skill alone, but by her integrity, her refusal to bend to his world. You see it, don't you? The way pride can turn to ash, the way a man who built his life on being seen can falter when the light shifts to another. Blake withdrew from competitions, his name fading from the spotlight, his kingdom reduced to whispers of what might have been. Emma's life, though, was no longer defined by that moment at the elite shooters club. It was defined by the mornings she spent at the range, by the letters she received from veterans who thanked her for giving them a reason to keep going, by the quiet evenings when she sat with Nathan's logbook, and felt his presence like a warm hand on her shoulder. She had become something more than the woman who had walked to that range with a crumpled day pass. She had become a guide, a beacon for those who had lost their way, a living testament to the strength that comes from honoring a promise. One evening, as the sun dipped low over Boston, painting the sky in hues of gold and amber, Emma stood outside the range, watching the veterans file out, their laughter a soft counterpoint to the city's hum. Michael Reeves approached, his boots heavy on the gravel, his smile carrying the weight of years. "You've built something here, Emma," he said, his voice rough but warm. "Nathan always said you were stronger than you knew." He was right. The words settled in her chest, a quiet affirmation of everything she had fought for. "You feel it, don't you? The way a single truth can anchor you, the way a memory can carry you forward." Emma returned home that night, the city's lights a distant glow through her window. She opened the wooden box, Nathan's medals glinting in the soft light, his letters a map of their shared past. She flipped through the logbook, her fingers lingering on his final entry, "Emma, Ebet Yards, perfect. You're ready for anything." The words were a promise, not just from him, but from herself. A promise to keep going, to keep living, to keep carrying his lessons into the world. She closed the book, her heart light, her breath steady. The grief that had once defined her was still there, but it was no longer a weight. It was a thread woven into the fabric of her strength, her purpose, her peace. She had walked into the elite shooters club as a widow, a woman dismissed by those who couldn't see her worth. She had left as something more, a woman who had proven, not to the world but to herself, that she was enough, the world would continue to tell her story, to weave its own narratives around her name. But Emma didn't need them. She didn't need the fame, the recognition, the validation of strangers. She had found her truth in the quiet moments, in the shots that landed true, in the lives she touched with her teaching. She had honored Nathan, not with trophies or titles, but with the life she was building, the legacy she was carrying forward. As she stood in her small apartment, the city's noise a faint hum beyond her walls, Emma felt a freedom she hadn't known in years. It wasn't the freedom of victory or acclaim. It was the freedom of knowing who she was, of knowing that her worth didn't depend on the world's gaze. She had kept her promise, and in doing so, she had found herself. The woman, the boy, the man, the soldier who knows their worth does not chase money, fame, or choices. They are simply content to keep moving forward, grounded in the knowledge that they are enough,